Hi, welcome to our podcast, a series of interviews with improvisers around the topic of improvisation. My name is Neil Thomas, and I am a long-term practitioner of making things up.
I'm Kevin James. I want to say that this is a podcast series by improvisers, for improvisers, about improvising, and especially about the details of improvisational practice. I think we're intrigued, we're curious, we're hopeful that improvisers will let their secrets out of the bag. How's that?
Great. I think that's great.
Hmm.
Welcome. Thanks for watching.
And today?
Tony Osborne from Sydney, Australia.
That's great. Let's go.
Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Tony.
Hi, Neil. Hi,
Neil.
Kevin.
So fabulous to have this opportunity to chat with you this morning, Tony. Thanks for taking up the invitation and
Yeah,
giving your time.
thanks. It is. No, it's exciting, and I feel a little bit chuffed that you asked me.
Great, great.
Great. Thanks, Tony. We should mention we've got a tag team of two because of your notoriety. We thought we should have two interviewers.
Okay. Is that to put me at my ease? Is it a bit of flattery?
Yes, it's obviously worked.
First, maybe we'll just start with how you came to improvisation, Tony. Was there a moment when you stumbled across it, or talk us through that? How you stumbled across improvisation and how that welded into what you were doing and where it went for a while.
Yeah. I'll be sort of pedantic about that because when I played in bands, I played in bands from about the age of 16, and there was a very a rich culture that I was involved in Perth back in the 70s, early 70s, where everyone used to get together in a particular hall that they hired for the night, and there'd just be a lot of loud, heavy metal level music being played, and there would be there might be a song somewhere along the line, but the song would ultimately go for half an hour. So yeah, where to start, I guess, is the question. But the first time I came across improv was as determined as such was, I remember in well, contact improv, of course. That when I actually left the music business at some point and became interested in theatre. So I did some fairly formal theatre training, which didn't involve a lot of improvising. But I'm trying to remember how it came. Oh, I remember. I got involved with a guy called Jim Hughes who ran some classes, and he was an Irish rogue of a ballet dancer who was teaching at the Academy of Performing Arts at that point. He ran these workshops, and they were full of improvising. And I ended up being in his little company and making pieces which had certain touch points that you had to hit, but otherwise you were improvising the journey. And they were very abstract pieces, lots of visual projections in the room and stuff like that. So that's probably the first real improvising I did, even though it was within a structure. And that his partner Ray Stellara had a company called Still Moves Dance Laboratory. With my acting background, they used to work in cross discipline, so they invited me into a couple of seasons. I ended up being a permanent member of Still Moves for a few years. And we actually did a project which was totally improvised with a writer, a musician. By then, they weren't necessarily categorizing me as an actor, but I was now one of the company. So, but it was an attempt to present a full-length piece that was improvised. So that was probably the first time. But it was the contact with Al Wonder where things really got started. As I'm sure the people that are going to listen to this podcast will know who Al Wonder is. who started a whole culture in Melbourne in the 80s of improvised work with his company Theatre of the Ordinary, and he used to teach a lot, teach regular classes, so lots of people got involved. My partner at the time, Alice Cummins, went to study with Al for a while, and then we had our own studio at that point in Perth, and she started teaching improv, and that's where I fell in love with it. She's transposed Al's classes into her setting using BMC and stuff, but essentially the performance and feedback at the end of the class, which is at the core of Al's work, was the inspiration to uncover my own interests in improv and what particular thing I was interested in, what my style was. That's where it started.
Tony, are you willing to roughly put a date to that, just to sort of give us some sense of a timeline?
Yeah, I can remember that it was 1990. Yeah, it might maybe 91, but anyway, it was 1991, somewhere around there. That piece I was just describing, It Still Moves, was 86. So there was quite a bit of improvising going on in my life. I went over to America and spent a month with Ruth Sapora in 95, and in 93, Alice and I traveled to America and to Europe and spent 3 months hanging out with people like Julian Hamilton, Katie Duck, Nancy Stark Smith, Christy Swain, quite a lot. We just sort of had a feast of input from people all over the place. And so that the 90s were sort of, I suppose, a bit of a training ground for me. And I also made some work which involved improvising too. I made a couple of solos in that decade, which had sections of complete open improv in them. So I scripted an hour and left 2 spaces of around 10 minutes where everyone in the production team would know that if I stop, around that point, I'm going to leave the script and go into something unknown. And then there was a cue to bring me back into the script. So that was the beginnings in Perth, and then we migrated to Sydney at the end of 99, beginning of 2000. What was the question again? I always do this.
I think you've answered the question. It was just sort of, how did you start Impro, the trail of investigations that followed that.
Yeah. It began in earnest once I moved to Sydney. Because in large part because Andrew Morris moved to Sydney at the same time, and we knew each other on the periphery before that, but we actually established a weekly practice together, working toward a longer form improvising, and that for me was the beginning of a serious practice in improvising. And in 2002, I started teaching, so all that's connected.
So, Tony, maybe that leads immediately into what was going to be the next question, to do with your practice, because I'm aware you teach, that you have a practice that involves working with sound and with other persons with sound, as well as your own performance practice with a particular style. Not everybody that'll be watching this knows you or knows of your approach. So how would you describe what it is that you do now as a performer, the various areas, maybe as performer, teacher? How would you describe your approach to improvised performance?
Well, I like to think that I keep the faith, the Al Wonder faith, because at the core of my teaching is the belief that everyone has a performer in them, and everyone can find a way of doing that. And when I run a workshop, I try and open the space for people to discover what that is, rather than prescribe how to do the thing. So, as you probably both know, the exercises are very open. They have concepts and ideas, or a little spark for people to work on. And having said that, I guess that's how I work as an improviser as well, trying not to prescribe what I do. The practice that has established itself with me over the last 20 years is to step up to perform with nothing in my mind, with no ideas or projections of a performance. And it's not always possible, but that's my aim. I remember, I think the last time we spoke, I told you the anecdote of when I first started working with Andrew. We had a season at Performance Space back in, when was it, 2001 or something, and I was in there with the audience out in the foyer, and I was in there, doing my warm-ups and getting ready and really getting into the performance space. And Andrew said, I said, do you want to warm up or something? Andrew says, no, I'm going to go and have a chat to people. And I realized I don't know if he does this consciously, but what he was doing was distracting himself from starting to make the work, because that's what I found myself doing in that space of preparation. You start to think, oh, what will I do? What will I do? And I think I've pretty much adopted that method of not thinking about the performance in any way before I do it, not even warming up, not doing, maybe do a bit of physical stretching, because I've got caught out there before where I haven't been warm enough in my body, and then suddenly I've got the impulse to do something very movement orientated. But otherwise, trying to keep that intellectual process at bay, so that the creative mind doesn't start projecting scenarios that you might follow. Because as soon as you step into the space with something like that, it's runs out very quickly, because that belonged to a moment 10 minutes ago, and you have to be in the space where you are right now to understand what's going on and to pick up the cues for content.
So we could call that the blank slate start, I suppose.
Yeah.
Much as that's possible.
Yeah. The thing is, when I know I've succeeded is when I've surprised myself with the material. That's a great feeling, for good or ill. Sometimes it's not a great performance, but if I've surprised myself and gone places that I didn't expect to go, well, I've succeeded in that practice at least.
Mm.
So Tony, if again, for those that are watching this who don't know or haven't seen your work, I guess most improvisers use, from the lineage of which you speak, use movement to a degree, use text to a degree, use sound, a range of sort of modes. How would you describe yours? Where do you you've got a certain theatricality inherent in what you do, I think, as well, but how would you name that up?
Yeah, all of the above, as far as the elements that could appear. But I always do start in the body. I'm always waiting for that moment where I've got something pressing that I want to say, but it often comes more easily from a movement. So I'm a great believer in waiting and being really present before the audience, and not pushing too hard on making something happen, because in my experience, it always occurs if you wait and you're patient and you just keep listening to what's going on, both in your thinking and in your body. And movement's a great thing to get something started. I can start to move on impulse, on an impulsive or even reflexive movement, following a reflexive movement in my body, and that will evoke something. Might be narrative, might be a memory, it might be an idea, might be a little bit of politics, who knows? But it's a start. And once you start, there's an accumulation, I think. You asked me about my style. What would people see? Probably probably characters would appear. It tends to happen that way. I'm often having a lot of fun, and there's a couple of particular voices that manifest, and I guess one of them is a sort of version of me or family members. It's a bit of a Cockney, and it can be a very amusing character, and it can be a very dark character. There's also a theatrical voice that arrives sometimes, which is there's the John Gielgud, Laurence Olivier type voice, and often they'll have a dialogue with each other. So I get into a space sometimes where I'm talking one character to another. Other times it's just me talking to the audience, having a rant, and always returning to movement. I think pretty much always returning to movement. I can't, it's a sort of Tourette's thing. I can't keep still in front of an audience usually. Anyway, although stillness is very powerful, which it's the tool I often use, and the music comes in really useful as a way of punctuating or assisting or providing a base theatrical line for what I do. So I sing in a choir, and I'm in an improvising experimental music group, and so I've got a lot of extended vocal practice that I can employ, which provides sort of sound effects, or I'll just sing sweetly. So all those things come together, and I can't tell you what it makes because it all depends on the day. But they're the tools.
I think you well described there, Tony, that sort of blend of tools, of abilities and capacities you have that tend to, I guess, blend together in particular ways each time. But you've got quite a broad base of resource, I think, quite a broad repertoire, and that becomes evident, I think, when you can wander into various performative ranges and places.
Yeah. I like to try and make a rounded piece with a beginning, a middle, and end. And really that's only because I'm very interested in endings being effective. I like to end a piece decisively, and that often when I feel the ending coming, I'll often have a little denouement of material which might not even be connected, or it might be quite abstract, but it just signals this is the end of the piece, and that can often be a great savior. If the piece has been a bit ordinary, if you end it well, that's what people take away, and that's what they remember, hopefully. But
I think it's been probably fairly well noted and acknowledged that you, out of all of the improvisers, have a particular, I'm going to use theatricality in terms of character, in terms of staging, in terms of your capacity to use the stage, use lighting, and so you've got a particular way, I think, of setting things up. And I imagine that is also sits in that place of sort of beginning, middle, and end that you speak of. There seems to be a structure. There seems to be, and maybe that harks back to theatrical training that you've had or ways you've approached being on stage. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think so. I've always, you know, I was the kid who avoided bullying by making people laugh. Um, so I was the class clown to my great detriment because I would send the teachers up within the classroom. Um, uh, um, and I've always had a love of impersonation and mimicry and just taking on that sort of stuff. If Andrew Morris is in the audience, I do a lot of obscure English comedians from the 60s because he's the only person that knows what I'm talking about. But I can't resist. Yeah, the theatrics is very much in my DNA, I guess, and the theatre training, the theatre experience has made that a part of how I perform, and I'm quite interested in creating a narrative of some kind. Sometimes it's looser than others, but it's very satisfying too for me. So to surprise myself uh, in a performance where I don't understand what I'm doing until I do it it's quite thrilling, and that sometimes that's been extraordinary, and sometimes it's sort of been quite ordinary. But that's the nature of improv, and I guess a lot of people come to improv through the confessional. My observation is that a lot of people are attracted to the work because they just want to actually come and spew up some things that are on their mind, and that's okay too. But if they're in my workshop, I'm going to encourage them to transform that to theatre.
Yeah.
It's okay to use your own material, but we don't want to do your therapy with you.
Yeah.
And that's definitely true of a paying audience. They didn't come to watch you emote. They want to be entertained. So I accept that contract in all things.
Yeah, great. I love that you so clearly articulated that, Tony. A commitment. It's a commitment to the audience, and
Yeah,
I'm kind of hearing all that around. Why have a great ending? It's because it will stick with the audience. So it feels like your theatrical training, which is in some ways all about the audience, has been married with an improvisational practice, which is often about the internals of the
yeah,
practitioner.
yeah.
Bring them together. It's kind of gold.
Yes, yes, and it is often about my internal goings on, the way I perform it. But I won't. I'll try and work out a way of transforming that on the way through to the audience. And then you have this very sincere, authentic content. The audience don't miss that if it's something you're actually feeling. And all the best actors do this, even if they're working with a script. They find their own emotional life and how it inhabits what they're trying to achieve with the character. So it's no different to a set piece, really. When you improvise, you can really use your own sensibility to create something acceptable as a fiction in a way.
Mm.
And I love that journey. So it's so interesting and so exciting.
Yeah. Well, I guess that maybe perhaps that leads into the next question that I had, which was which seems a little irrelevant, really. But the question is, how do you keep your practice alive and developing? And listening to you, it's so clear that you need no, you need no support in that. You're so alive and present and thrilled and curious in your practice. But perhaps for those who aren't, um, is there? What suggestions would you have?
Well, I'm going to contradict you, Neil.
Okay, great.
I'm already there. It doesn't stay alive unless you have a witness. especially when you work. I prefer to work solo. That's the thing I like doing. I can't do that on my own. You know, sort of ironically enough, I need someone to be watching me for it to mean anything, or for me to have the creative drive to present material. So my advice to someone wanting to establish an improv practice, and I just realized my phone is not on airplane mode, which would mean if someone rings me, we'll get cut off. There we go. If someone's interested in establishing a practice, well, I would say, obviously find a class, but also find a practice partner or two. It means you can't go to a studio on your own and practice solo improv. I've tried it over the years, and it doesn't work. Certainly doesn't work for me. You need someone watching, and going back to Al Wonder, you perform and then you report what your experience was and ask for feedback from your witness, who will give you some idea of what they perceived what you did, and all that accumulates into okay, so this is what I'm doing, and that bit was interesting, and that bit was shaky, or whatever. And as long as you keep the feedback positive, you rock up to your practice with a sort of spring in your step. You know, there's always it's an exciting thing when you practice with someone, because it's unknown, but you know it's going to be a positive experience, because that's the Al Wonder philosophy. Give feedback that's positive. You don't have to focus on a critique at all. And it's essential, because when you improvise in front of an audience, the last voice you need in your head is, oh, that's not very good. You cannot let that voice enter your consciousness. And it's the same with sharing practice. You want the positive feedback. If there's something that's not working, it'll go away. You need to hear what's good. What did I do that really worked? What's that good thing? And I'll focus on that. So that's the tip. Find a workshop where you can mess about with other people and be led by someone. I think it's a good thing. And establish a practice with one or more people where you just meet and perform for each other. Yeah. Oh dear, I'm sorry, I've got the new headphones and I touched them and it's turned Siri on. He wants to know what I mean by set and perform for each other.
Wonderful. Kevin was talking to his watch during one performance, and there's a real, you know, of course, the AI, and there's questions around this, and whether that mightn't be cheating in an improvisational sense, to have Siri giving you a little bit of guidance in you.
Well, that could be interesting, getting random suggestions from a bot.
Yeah, provocations.
Yeah.
Tony, could I, just in passing, and we've mentioned positive feedback, and we know how central that has been, I guess, to Al Wonder's teaching, and into a couple of the streams, I guess, of sort of historical lineage in improvised performance. And I acknowledge how useful it is as a confirmation and as a sort of way of well, as a part of a way of developing. But do you think there's other approaches to feedback, and to, let's call it, a reflective practice, where you progress your practice and develop your practice not just based on positive confirmation, but actually intrigues you might have, or challenges you might set yourself, or strategies you might develop, or provocations that you might request from others, something that continues to develop your practice, that is not just based on the positive feedback model, which I want to acknowledge, but I do wonder a lot about the benefits and the potential limits, and where we as long-term practitioners continue to find our way.
Yeah, I agree that it's not the only way. I was responding very specifically to Neil's question about what's your tip for people wanting to establish. Well,
Okay.
when you first start, positive feedback. When you're first starting, you don't want to hear the critique. You want positive feedback. And as you say, once you've been working for a while, there's room to start to have an agenda. There's room if you wanted to get your practice partner to intervene in some way. I'm not really sure what I mean by that, but certainly my feedback, for instance, in my practice with Andrew and you and Noel would stray from that positive feedback model. But still, I'm never going to say to you, I didn't like that. That bit was rubbish. I mean, you're just never going to say that. So however we elaborate the feedback as time goes on and we get more experienced or more trusting, as the trust between practice partners is the important thing. You can stray from that strict positive feedback, but you're never going to be negative either. It's at the base of everything. And so something that's productive, a suggestion that's productive, is always welcome once you've established a long-term experience with someone else. I think, yeah, it doesn't have to be rigid.
No, and I'm thinking of positivity not into relationship to negativity, but I guess positive feedback. There's something about confirming what is there, whereas I guess there's a place for provocation and invitation to what is not there or where things might go, which is not necessarily highlighting the negative, but actually creating something further invitational. I wonder.
Yeah, yes, I think you're right. I think every practice would be different, and also the aspirations of everyone would be different as time goes on. Yeah. And that how you would interpret the feedback would depend on the agenda of the practice, I guess. But certainly there'd be room to just, there's discussion occurs. You and I in our practice discuss the elements that we've worked with and how we might proceed in the future with that, and try another idea, etc. Like all practitioners would in other forms, not just improv. In the theatre, trying to make a work, it's essential that you would discuss what had occurred and, okay, we'll try this next time or whatever. Yeah.
Neil, I'm wondering, have you got any further questions around that particular area before we move on to the last focal area?
I was thinking about the critical mind, and when you present a piece of theatre to an audience, they are generally in a critical mind. They are assessing it and trying to understand it. So generally, there's that sort of critical mind happening in a theatrical situation. Whereas in the improv community, in the improv world, it's that as an audience member, generally people are not critical. They're kind of leaving it at the door. So it's almost like a niche. It strikes me that the improv audience is almost like a niche audience, and quite different from an ordinary audience, let's say. So it's I was straddling between the two. I've spent some time straddling between the two, and so obviously so have you, Tony. I wonder if you had any reflections upon that.
Well, you see, I think it's a shame that there is a split between the initiated and the uninitiated. I think we need to have a recruitment drive in the theatrical world, because I think you should be judged on what you produce, not once someone's paid $10 at the door or whatever. You're now under an obligation to produce something. So I'm happy for an audience to be judgmental. So I don't. I'm comfortable with an audience saying, "Well, that was okay," or "That was crap." But I don't need them to look after me because I'm improvising. I think
Great.
it falls upon me to produce a piece, and I've chosen to do it spontaneously rather than with a script. But I think the obligation is to produce something interesting is still there, whether it's scripted or not.
Great. Great. Great.
I think we probably, time-wise, now need to sort of lead into the last, maybe the last question, and
Okay.
it really is to do with, and I'm very interested in this area, how we keep our practice alive in the longer term. What aspirations do we have, or how do we keep developing? How do we keep furthering? And that, I think, is going to mean something quite different to each of us. But there is something about how do we continue to generate our practice, stay interested, and stay purposed. And I guess some of us want to continue to break new ground and further. Others might find ways that work very well for that and stay within a domain and refine it and refine it and refine it. Do you have a comment on that regarding your particular practice, Tony, and how you keep it alive and how you continue to develop, in inverted commas, your form and your approach?
Yeah, a couple of things. As a darker thing as it might be to say, for me, COVID was a great gift to my practice because it became essential to use Zoom, and I would never have expected for that technology to be so productive. So because I live in Sydney and because the people I want to practice with are in Melbourne, Zoom enables me to continue that. And I think I've probably developed more over the last couple of years because of regular practice than I have at any other time. I've often had spurts of having someone to practice with, and the practice develops, and then it falls away, and I have to sort of start again. Whereas with Zoom, I can keep a baseline of practice going all the time, and just working from home. And until last July, I was thinking, does this really have an effect on live performance? And when I came down to Melbourne and performed for you guys in Now Pieces and On the Verge, boom, my practice was fully supporting me in making work in front of an audience. And I was really excited about that. So that's and as we're discovering, Kevin, we're not sure what we're doing in our practice, and that's developing through the discussions we have. Let's try this. Let's try this. And in some strange ways, it's not actually manifesting in anything that we can do in live performance yet, because we've tried it a couple of times and it's not been very satisfying. So the practice is the thing. So the question of how do you keep it going is keep practicing. I know that you have lots of live practice with people. Well, that's the way you keep it going. If I, and I'm not saying it won't happen, but I could practice in a studio regularly with people, it will be the same effect as Zoom. So you keep practicing, share practice, have people to work with. That's how you keep it alive. And I find when I practice, ideas come of where it might go. And everything's been a bit stalled over the last few months because I moved house and I've moved into a space that's not quite as conducive to that practice as it was. I've got to work something out. But that's the baseline. Keep sharing practice. Now, I made some pieces in the 90s where I did have these long periods in a set piece where I was improvising, and that I'd like to try that out again. So in the longer term, my aspiration is to make a set piece again, which will employ all the experience and skills that I've gained through improvising to make that work.
So in some ways you're talking about goals and aspirations there, Tony, and on one hand, and on the other hand, also talking about that's in the bigger picture, longer term. And the other part you're talking about, I guess, is how things emerge in immersion in practice over time. What comes next, or what you find, or what you might become as a performer happens somewhat emergently as well. As the more we're practicing, the more we're immersed in the process, the more things arise that become our practice. Would that be reasonable to say? So there's the bigger picture of aspirations you might have, and then the more immediate picture of things emerge on the go the more we practice, that shapes our practice.
Yeah, I think that's true. You have the immediate manifestation of development that comes out of the practice and the practice developing, but also practicing engenders ideas and new directions that you might want to go in. And I have, at any time over the last 20 years, I've had many ideas bubbling away. Of course, ideas are only ideas until you actually start doing something concretely with them.
Tony, I'm just sort of flabbergasted to absorb and to listen to the depth of your experience and your real commitment to kind of what you do. And it's thorough and it's impressive, and it's just
Thank you, Neil.
wonderful to hear.